Kia Australia has pretty big expectations for its littlest EV. This thing is priced to take on some pretty popular competitors from China, plus it's got enough features to make even maybe a Euro buyer think twice. In fact, it's priced from less than $50,000 drive away at its cheapest model. I've driven it once in Korea and I came away pretty impressed, but now that it's wheels down on the road here in Australia, the big question is that still the case?
In the Kia EV3 lineup, pricing ranges from $47,600 before on-road costs for the entry-level EV3 Air standard range, up to $63,950 for the GT line long range. Impressively, Kia says the Air standard range is available for less than $50,000 drive away, even in WA where it sneaks in at just $49,990. In other states and territories, it comes with a drive away price of $48,990. There are 3 trim levels but 4 variants, with the Air long range, Earth long range, and GT line long range all joining the Air standard range. Stepping up to an Air long range from a standard range is a $53,315 ask, though both come with the same extensive list of features. Highlights are 17-inch alloy wheels, LED lights, a large multimedia arrangement with 2 12.3-inch screens and a 5-inch climate control screen, plus wireless phone charging. Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are wireless, and there are USB-C ports in both the front and rear rows, a 12-volt outlet in the front, and a household-style power outlet in the second row. The Earth goes for $58,600 and gains a set of larger 19-inch alloy wheels, synthetic leather seats with heating and ventilation, while the GT line adds a series of exterior design changes, upgraded LED headlights and taillights, and a head-up display. There's a lot more features than that in each grade, so check out the full review at carsguide.com.au for more details.
Family resemblance is everything when it comes to Kia's electric cars, and the EV3 definitely has lineage on show. The entry-level Air and mid-spec Earth designs are kind of similar from the outside, but this one here is the top-spec GT line.
At the same time as being seemingly made of sharp, angular elements, the EV3's overall silhouette is relatively soft. Unfortunately for anyone who hates a bit of marketing, that means Kia's design philosophy, which is usually a relatively meaningless line, is actually bang on, opposites united. Inside and out, the EV3 is a direct descendant of the brand's Halo EV9 large SUV, and even in base Air specification, looks like a properly premium small SUV.
Most of the colours, aside from one quite bright red shade, are pretty subtle when it comes to the EV3. This matcha green is one that I reckon looks a little bit better in person than it might on camera.
To invoke a cliche, the interior layout has the vibe of something you might imagine a spaceship cockpit looks like if you were a kid or you were living in the 80s, but it doesn't sacrifice any practicality by doing so. There are real buttons and switches visible, but only a few, as the big screens kind of dominate the driver's side of the front row.
The EV3 has a pretty slick interior for a small SUV, and fortunately the Australian specification is pretty well equipped all the way through the range. Even from the base model, you've got nice materials through the cabin. You get that massive 3-part screen that's borrowed from the flagship EV9 large SUV, which consists of a 12.3-inch screen for multimedia, a 12.3-inch screen for the driver display, and a 5-inch screen for climate control in the middle. The climate control screen is a little bit hidden by the steering wheel when you're actually looking at it, but you've got these physical buttons here for the climate controls as well. You've got fan speed, temperature, stuff like that. Kia reckons physical controls like that are pretty important for keeping the car accessible to a broad range of people, and I tend to agree. I get pretty annoyed when all of the controls are sort of stuffed onto that one screen. That gets quite distracting when you're driving. In terms of the differences in the interior between the 3 grades, the GT line gets a couple of things that the 2 lower grades don't. For example, it gets this sliding out table here, which is pretty convenient, but you do also lose the storage space that would otherwise be under here. Fortunately, the car has plenty of other places to put things. There's a big storage spot down here, 2 little cup holders that have little click out things so you don't need them to be there all the time, a wireless charging pad for your phone, and you've also got the storage under there and space for water bottles and smaller things in the door cards too. In the second row, I'm sitting behind my own seating position. I'm 5'11", and I've got plenty of knee room here, but there's not a lot of toe room for my feet under the seat in front of me. So the space I can put my feet in that little spot here is a little bit limited. I feel like if the driver had their seat just a little bit higher up, I'd probably be okay. But as an adult in the back of a small SUV, you should probably never really expect to be truly comfortable for a long trip. The seat itself is pretty comfy. The back's kind of upright, but it's not too bad. You've also got this cup holder here with the armrest as you pull it down. It's all sort of standard stuff for the back seat of a car. There's also a hard cover on the seat in front of you, so if you were a lot taller than me and your knees were touching the back and the driver was maybe a bit tall too, you'd probably be sort of finding your knees would be on that hard plastic there. Fortunately, there is also a couple of USB-C plugs in the back here for charging devices, and each side gets their own direction controls for the HVAC too. Under the two vents, you've also got a little storage spot where you could put something like a water bottle or maybe your phone, but fortunately each side at the door cards also has a spot for a water bottle as well. Kia touts the EV3's interior space as being pretty good, and even for a small SUV with a bunch of batteries running along under its boot, the boot space is pretty decent as well. There's 460 litres of space here with the rear seats up, or 1251 litres with them folded down. The other thing the boot has going for it though is this floor that you can drop down, so you get a little bit of extra space for taller items, or you've got the space under there as well for things like charging cables, which you could also put in the 25-litre frunk if you wanted.
All three versions of the EV3 have the same drivetrain, the only difference being the smaller battery in the Air Standard range. The EV3 is two-wheel drive only, with a single motor at the front wheels putting out 150 kilowatts and 283 newton meters. Differing weights between variants results in different 0 to 100 kilometer times. The quickest by just a little is the entry-grade Air Standard range at 7.5 seconds, likely thanks to a smaller and lighter battery.
The main thing we really wanted to check with the EV3 as it lands here in Australia is if Kia's localized ride and handling program has sort of made the car suitable for our roads. And first impressions were pretty good. The suspension does a pretty good job of keeping things like bumps and rough roads from really intruding into the cabin in terms of vibrations, noise, or those big bumpy feelings that you sometimes get on really awful roads. In fact, even with the radio off and on some pretty rough, quite fast country roads, the cabin feels like a pretty well cocooned place. It's insulated from the sounds, the road noise, the wind noise, and all that sort of stuff from outside. Its cornering and handling is generally pretty good as well. The car stays relatively flat. There's not a lot of pitching or rolling, so it feels sort of nice and safe and planted. And there's just sort of that gentle understeer that you get if maybe you've come into a corner a little bit too spicy, and you know, as a front wheel drive car, it sort of has that nice, safe sort of letting you know that you've probably gone in a bit too quick, but you're sort of not in any danger yet. Where the EV3 does sort of start to show a little bit of weakness and could probably do with some attention is its steering. At low speeds and around areas like this in the city, the suburbs, it's pretty good. It's light enough that you sort of don't notice that there's much resistance with it, and you can sort of maneuver and, you know, steer around it. It doesn't really come into play in your brain too much. It's quite easy to use. However, when you're driving at, you know, something like 80 or 100 k's an hour on a country road where you might be needing to steer and slow down and turn into sharp corners, it's quite heavy. There's sort of some unnecessary resistance, and it's sort of actually a little bit tiring. It sort of makes this car feel a little bit of a letdown in sort of some of those roads that should be otherwise quite fun. I'm not sure why it's like that. It's sort of regardless of the camber of the road, the drive mode, anything like that doesn't seem to affect it. It's just quite heavy, and there's that resistance, which is a little bit of a letdown. But unfortunately, that's sort of probably not going to be the place this car really spends most of its time. And fortunately, it's not really a deal breaker in the city or the suburbs, so it sort of gets a pass mark there just. Other than that, the EV3 is really pleasant to drive. Its power delivery and the actual outputs that it has feel about right for an electric small SUV. It never feels underpowered, but it also doesn't feel unruly, and even though it's front wheel drive, it never sort of spins the front wheels. It's not delivering that torque in a harsh way. As well, the paddles that allow you to adjust the regenerative braking are really useful. They actually mean you probably won't need to use the left pedal that much. There's a few modes that you can set it to. There's the regular, 3-stage intensity, but there's also an automatic or an I-pedal mode, which is essentially the attempt at a one pedal. You still probably will need to use the brakes if something pulls up quickly in front of you, but aside from that, it's really good for keeping the regenerative braking going and allowing you to use as much of that sort of driving range from the battery as you possibly can. Ergonomically, the car, the way that you sort of sit, hold the steering wheel, everything feels really comfortable. There's pretty decent visibility. There could be a little bit better visibility out the back and to the sides, but for most small SUVs, that seems to sort of be the case anyway with the way that they're styled.
There are two battery sizes for the EV3, the 58.3 kilowatt hour unit for the Air standard range and the 81.4 kilowatt battery each of the long range variants is equipped with. Of course, the Air standard range has the shortest electric driving range, 436 kilometers under WLTP testing. The Air long range is the variant with the furthest electric driving range of the bunch at 604 kilometers, while the Earth and GT line both wear the same set of figures with 563 kilometers of electric range. On DC fast charging with a CCS Type 2 charger, the EV3 charges as quickly as 29 minutes from 10 to 80% in standard range, or if you've got a long range, 31 minutes when using a 350 kilowatt fast charger. There's no ANCAP or equivalent score for the EV3 yet, though Kia seems confident it should score well. Of course, we can't take the brand at its word, but the EV3 does have a pretty comprehensive list of safety features and all are standard across the range.
And of course, I should mention the active safety stuff, the beeps and the bings and the bongs that sort of happen when the car's trying to help you drive. There is that shortcut button that Kia has on the steering wheel that you can set so that you can go straight to the menu and turn all of that sort of stuff off, especially if you find the speed limit dings and the driver attention alerts annoying. The other thing is, though, that most of the stuff that you probably will leave on at some points, things like the cruise control and the lane keep assist, are all pretty well tuned. They sort of behave in a way that feels natural and predictable, and sort of you can trust them while you're driving the car.
Kia's 7-year unlimited kilometre warranty applies to the EV3, and though that was once industry-leading, it's now being matched or overtaken by many rivals. Kia also backs the high voltage equipment in the car with a more specific 7-year or 150,000 kilometre warranty, whichever comes first. Australian servicing costs are pretty minimal in the EV3, with Kia offering prepaid plans for 3, 5 or 7 years, those costing $674, $1,285 or $1,897 respectively. Certainly some points for Kia on that one. The GT line is relatively expensive, and the Air standard range isn't groundbreaking even at under $50,000. But the sweet spot in the EV3 lineup is being able to pay $53,315 for the Air long range and come away with a roomy small SUV that can realistically cover almost 600 k's in the real world. And it does everything properly, no big red flags or deal breakers. The EV3 might have a bit of sensible about it compared to some other electric small SUVs, but when it looks this cute and can get you an extra round trip out of the city compared to Euro brands at the same price or more, it's hard not to be impressed.